psychologist would be taking too narrow a view of all he has brought together in his inquiries over the past decades. He is Professor of Social Anthropology at the University of Aberdeen, after having held the Max Gluckman Professorship at the University of Manchester before. He is a fellow both of the British Academy and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He has done ethnographic fieldwork amongst Sami and Finnish people and has written extensively on comparative questions of environment, technology, and social organization in the circumpolar world, as well as on the role of animals in human society, and on issues in human ecology and on evolutionary theory in anthropology, biology, and history. He has explored the links between environmental perception and skilled practice with a view to replacing traditional models of cultural transmission with a relational approach focusing on the growth of embodied skills of perception and action within social and environmental contexts. Among the most recent books and essay collections are his Being Alive, essays on movement, knowledge, and description from 2011, Making, Anthropology, Archaeology, Architecture from 2010, Lives, A Brief History from 2007, and from 2000, The Perception of the Environment, a collection of 23 essays on livelihood, dwelling, and skill. He has co-edited a collection of the collection Creativity, there's a lot of space also up front here. He has co-edited the collection Creativity and Cultural Improvisation with Helen, and Ways of Walking with Joe Urbans in 2008. From this broad array of stimulating work, you will have a chance to get into deep discussion tomorrow during the Featured Thinker Day, but I would also recommend for those who cannot participate in the Featured Thinker Day to just grab one or two of his stimulating short and powerful essays, such as Against Soundscapes or In Defense of Handwriting. In searching for ways to introduce him, I found the following excerpt from an interview where he called on anthropology to focus less on data and more on what matters. Quote, to practice anthropology is to join with those among whom we work in a speculative inquiry into the possibilities and potentials of human life in the one world we all inhabit. Anthropology in this sense is not a positive science but an art of inquiry. And he will now allow us to join him in his art of inquiry with his talk on thinking shallow. Welcome to Debbie.
Well, thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here. I just had an idea in the last 5 minutes, and I was just rewriting this. I don't know how this is going to work, but these are ideas in progress, so bear with me. It is a fine summer's day, and as you stretch out in the sun, you find yourself contemplating the blue of the sky. Could anything be more mysterious, you wonder? Remote, untouchable, seemingly empty, the sky seems nevertheless to have swamped your visual awareness. You tap your forehead and are reassured to feel its hard surface. Yes, you're still there and you haven't melted into the ether. And yet, in the visual field, that tapping finger strikes no surface, but rather looms as a ghostly presence that casts its shadow into the void. Rather like if you had your finger in front of a camera lens when you're taking a picture. It shouldn't be there. Are you there, you ask of yourself again? To which, if you happen to be the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, you would receive the following response. I am the sky itself, as it is drawn together and unified, and as it begins to exist for itself. My consciousness is saturated with this limitless bloom. But you could have been the musicologist, Victor Zuckerkandl. Gazing up at the sky, says Zuckerkandl, I see not a thing out there, but boundless space in which I lose myself. So in the perception of the sky, it seems that the space of conscious awareness, or of what we could call affect, has merged with that of the cosmos. They have become one. But here's the surprise. For Merleau-Ponty, contemplating the sky tells us all we need to know about what it means to see. For Zuckerkandl, however, the experience one has looking up at the sky is precisely what it means to hear. Now, what we see, of course, is pure luminosity, and what we hear is sound. So my principal aim in this talk is to explore the parallels between light and sound. But I have another aim, and that is to understand the relation between both light and sound and the line. And to do that, I want to imagine that you're no longer sunbathing, but flying a kite. This affords another rather more active way of inhabiting the sky than just gazing up at it. Through the skillful manoeuvring of your hand, which holds the end of a connecting thread, you're able to join with the aerial currents that course above your head, causing the kite to soar, swoop, hover, or dive, while keeping your feet firmly on the ground. Now, I want to suggest that this experience comes as close as anything to what it feels like to play a musical instrument. And the example I should use, since the instrument I play is the cello. With my cello, I have actually to sit, making the performance even more sedentary than that of the kite flyer. Moreover, I'm not connected to the cello as I am to the kite by a thread. Rather, I hold the instrument supported by a spike firmly between the knees. And yet, when I play, I spin a line of sound that soars and swoops no less than does the kite at the end of its thread. Indeed, there is music in the flying of a kite, just as there's flight in the playing of an instrument. The question is, what happens to the instrument when I start to play? It's a question that has always puzzled me and still does, but I should try to answer it. But I'd like to begin by introducing a third figure alongside philosopher Merleau-Ponty and musicologist Zuckerkandl. And this is the psychologist James Gibson. I have enormous sympathy for Gibson's so-called ecological approach to perception, largely because of his determination to understand how we perceive the world we actually inhabit, rather than the artificial world of the research laboratory. It's a world, as he put it, comprised of the earth and the sky, with objects on the earth and in the sky, of mountains and clouds, fires and sunsets, pebbles and stars. That's the world we inhabit, and we need to understand how we perceive that. And yet, ultimately, I have found Gibson's approach too limiting. And nowhere does this become more evident than in the problem he has with the sky. It all goes back to his insistence that of all the possible things that can be seen, light is not one of them. You can see everything else, but you can't see light. What we see, he says, are things specified by the light, not light as such. For example, as you walk around a solid object like a table, the pattern of light reflected from its surfaces as it reaches your moving eyes undergoes continuous modulation. But underlying these modulations are certain parametric constants. Gibson calls these constants invariants. And his contention is that these invariants are sufficient to fully specify the form and texture of the object seen. And in this he's out to refute an alternative view, which was long ascendant in the psychology of perception, that light is all we see, that perceivers have nothing else to go on than sensations arising from the stimulation of photoreceptors in the retina, and therefore that it is left to the mind to contribute conceptual form to the raw material of sensory input. So to perceive a table, for example, it is necessary to pull from memory some image of tableness and to apply it to the visual stimulus, which is not in itself sufficient to specify the construction that stands before us. Now, I have no wish to mount a defense assumption apparently shared by both sides of the argument about what light is. In Gibson's words, light is photons or waves or radiant energy. So whether we argue with classical optics that light is all that we see, or with the ecological approach that we never see light, only patterns in the light, our understanding of what light is remains the same. It is the physical cause of which retinal stimulation is the effect. As radiation, it is emitted from a source. As illumination, it lights up the world. Radiation, principally from the sun, becomes illumination by being scattered in all directions, by refraction through particles in the atmosphere and reflection from the mottled and textured surfaces of the earth. Now, to the extent that the illumination converging on a point is structured, it contains information that specifies features of the environment. But unstructured light specifies nothing. What we see then is emptiness. And this, according to Gibson, is precisely what happens when we gaze into the clear blue sky. On lifting one's gaze from the landscape across the line of the horizon to the sky, the structured light that specifies the opaque textures and surfaces of the landscape from which it is reflected gives way to the unstructured light that permeates the sky, leading to the perception of a translucent void. Now we can now begin to see why Gibson has such a problem with the sky. If you cannot see light, but only what is specified by the light, and if the light of the sky specifies nothing at all, then how can we see the sky? Indeed, Gibson answers his own question of how one might visually perceive a luminous field such as the sky with this most enigmatic of responses. To me it seems, he says, that I see the sky, not luminosity as such. The sky is luminous, but to perceive the sky, he says, is not to perceive its luminosity. What, we might wonder, is left of the sky once its luminosity has been subtracted? We may as well be out in pitch black night. And such, indeed, is the strange conclusion to which Gibson moves. The light of the sky, he admits, is no different from darkness, because it specifies nothing. There is nothing to be perceived. The illuminated sky of the day, like the blackness of the night, is emptiness itself. Now true, even Merleau-Ponty might agree that skylight cannot itself be an object of perception. As I contemplate the blue of the sky, he writes, I am not set over against it as an acosmic subject. I don't possess it in thought, or spread out towards it some idea of blue such as might reveal the secret of it. But the difference is this. For Merleau-Ponty, the light is not what he sees, but what he is. Luminosity for him is a mode of being. I am the sky itself, he declares. And to grasp the illumination, not of surfaces in the world, but of being itself, we need a different understanding of light. Now, I promised a lecture about sound, not about light, and I don't intend to prolong these puzzles and paradoxes of visual perception. But the reason I introduced them was to lay the foundations for a parallel argument concerning sound and hearing. For in the psychology of music and of auditory perception more generally, the same or very similar debates have been played out. On the one hand are those who have resort to the orthodox idea in psychology of the poverty of the stimulus, who insist that when we identify what we hear as this or that, we have imposed our own conceptual forms, drawn from the sedimentations of cultural memory, upon the raw material of auditory sensations, which are not in themselves sufficient to specify their objects. That's the orthodox view. Others, on the other hand, have made explicit appeal to Gibbs arguing, as Gibson did apropos light, that the one thing we cannot hear is sound itself. What we hear, they say, are invariants. Of course, we can interpret these invariants in whatever way we wish. All such interpretations, however, are grounded in a direct perception of the real. So just as the invariants of visual perceptions are patterns in the light, not light itself, so they are too in oral perception. Here, sound, just as light, is like a messenger that delivers form and pattern to the doors of your perception, but that magically vanishes at the moment you let them in. That, it is supposed, is why when asked to report on what we hear, we so commonly tell not of the sounds themselves, but of the objects or actions to which they draw our attention. You say, what did you hear? I heard a dog barking. I heard a car engine running. I heard a cello being played. I don't describe the sound, I describe the objects or actions which have produced the sound. Adopting just such a Gibsonian approach, the musicologist Eric Clark argues that music offers a particularly clear example of invariance in the perceived identity of material under transposition and other kinds of transformation. So, the theme or motif is picked out as a particular pattern of pitch intervals or temporal proportions, regardless of its modulations in the unfolding of a work. So there are musical invariants, and when we listen to music, according to Clark, adopting the Gibsonian approach, what we hear are the patterns, not the sound. The sound delivers the patterns to us, but they are not what we hear. So to sum up so far, whereas from the point of view of classical acoustics, we hear sound and not music, the music taking shape subsequently from the mental processing of received acoustic stimuli. From a Gibsonian perspective, we hear music but not sound, the music lying in the invariant structures of ambient sound and transformation. But both approaches start from a physicalist definition of sound, that is, as mechanical vibrations in a medium. And as such, sound has no need of creatures with ears for it to exist. The tree falling in a storm, to take a very celebrated philosophical example, the tree falling in a storm makes a sound regardless of whether there is anyone there to hear it. Ears and hearing establish the relevance of the sound, not its existence. Gibson says relevance is an ecological factor, and existence is a physical one. But what if this sound was so scrambled, so diffuse, that it is impossible to discern in it any structure, any pattern at all? We would then find ourselves in a situation analogous to that of Gibson, wondering what he sees when he looks up at the sky. And his answer would have to be that what he hears in scrambled sound is noise and not sonority as such. Just as in the sky, he says, I see light, but I don't see light, just nothing. He would have to say too, with sound, that he hears the noise, but not sonority. And we might wonder what is left of noise once its sonority has been subtracted. Indeed, just as Gibson is ultimately unable to tell day from night, so on similar grounds, we would have no means of distinguishing noise from silence. With both extremes, there is literally nothing to hear, no pattern, no structure. Noise is like the swirling fog or the whiteout of a snowstorm. Silence like the blackest of black nights. All of which takes us back to Zuckerkantel and Merleau-Ponty. I've shown that for Merleau-Ponty, the light of the sky is not an object of perception, nor is is sound an object of perception for Zuckerkant. But nor are light and sound mere vectors that carry information about the world to the doors of our perception that vanish at the point of arrival. They are qualities of experience in themselves. In seeing, Merleau-Ponty would say, I am light. In hearing, Zuckerkant would say, I am sound. Of course, there could be no light without radiant energy, and no sound without vibration in a material medium, and neither seeing nor hearing without receptors in the eyes and ears and their neural connections. But as qualities of experience, sound and light cannot be reduced to their physical, physiological, or neurological prerequisites. So let's return to what Merleau-Ponty has to say about light and vision, and ask whether something similar might work for sound and hearing as well. Wherever sensing meets the sensible, Merleau-Ponty writes, or whenever our attention is let loose into the world, there is ignited a kind of spark. It's like the coming together of two opposite poles, one bodily and affective, the other celestial and cosmic, which